a conversation with TheWrap's 2022 Changemakers. Led by moderator Sharon Waxman.
You know, you're such a diverse group. You all do very different things, and you're all distinguished in your own way. But we put this list together to shine a spotlight on people who are really moving our society forward and who are innovating and have touched the world for the better. And so we want to know about your paths and how you got here and why you do it. So I'm going to start with you, Shannon, because you know, I don't know, we probably met 5 or 6 years ago. You had started Moms Demand Action, I guess at your kitchen table, I'm guessing, something like that, after another one of the massacres that's happened in our gun-plagued country and having just had enough. And I've watched your journey with such amazement and wonder, and now, we've just come through the midterms, and I believe 140 of your volunteers were voted into office. And yet we still are plagued by gun violence. So let me just start by asking you to share, I've heard the story, but I want you to share it again, why you started Moms Demand Action and how it's going.
Sure. So 10 years ago today was the mass shooting at Sandy Hook School in Newtown, Connecticut. 20 children and 6 educators were slaughtered in the sanctity of an American elementary school. And at the time, 10 years ago today, was folding laundry on my bed in Indiana, and I had CNN on the background, and I saw this news chyron saying that there was an active shooter in Newtown, Connecticut. And so I sort of, like so many others that day, just sat on the side of my bed and watched this tragedy unfold. And even today, it's hard to fathom that even happened in this country. And I thought, you know, I grew up in the 80s, and Mothers Against Drunk Driving was so influential to me. There has to be something like that for gun safety. There has to be a group of really pissed off moms that are going to go toe-to-toe with the most powerful, most wealthy special interest that's ever existed. This was just my idea on a Facebook page. If you know anything about type A women, you know that they began calling me and direct messaging me and emailing me and saying, I want to do this where I live. And none of us really knew what this was. We just knew we had to start organizing, and that's what we did. And, you know, I have spent the last 10 years as a full-time volunteer working to change this issue legislatively, electorally, culturally. And here we are, 10 years later, we have 10 million supporters. We're twice as large as the NRA. And not only have we passed hundreds of good gun laws in this country in state houses, and the first federal piece of legislation passed this summer, the first in 30 years in this country, but we also stopped the NRA's agenda 90% of the time every year for the last year and 7 years in state houses in this country.
Wow. That's amazing. I remember every time we've spoken, you spoke at one of our Power Women events, and you talked about having a state-focused strategy, and in the meantime, in the interim, the NRA has gotten weaker and weaker and more exposed for being a kind of a corrupt organization. Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see, can you see over that horizon? Because it's hard to see anything with all the shootings that keep happening.
I absolutely do. You know, when I started doing this work a decade ago, about a quarter of all Democrats in Congress had an A rating from the NRA. Today, none do. And in fact, 15 Republicans signed on to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act I mentioned that passed this summer. So we are slowly but surely loosening the grip that the gun lobby has had on our lawmakers, and even getting Republicans to be on the right side of this issue. And that's how you win in this country. It isn't just having Democrats on your side. You really need every lawmaker to feel like if they do the right thing, you'll have their back, but if they do the wrong thing, you'll have their job. That's the secret to any social issue in this country. And so I think that is what we've done, right? This army of angry, and we're not just moms anymore, we're mothers and others, students and survivors. But they need to fear these people in red shirts who show up. By the way, we owned red before Donald Trump. That show up and show that we have our eyes on them, and that we will thank them for doing the right thing, and we will shame them for doing the wrong thing.
One of the things that I've noticed, because you are 24/7 on Twitter, or somebody who uses your account
That's
is
me.
24/7.
Yeah,
is it
that's
really
me.
you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's just amazing. And
Or sad, I don't know, one of those.
and all of us are kind of like wavering about how we feel about being on Twitter these days. But I have noticed, at least on Twitter, and I don't know where else it's come at you, but I'm sure it has, the venom and the vitriol that has been aimed at you is shocking, and I'm pretty tough. I mean, it makes me wither inside on your behalf when I see the stuff. And you should just check out her Twitter feed. You always come back with humor. You come back with like, yeah, you're an asshole.
I've never called anyone an asshole.
No, she has never called anyone an asshole. Maybe an a-hole. But like, how do you deal with that?
You know, I naively did not realize there was this underbelly of America that existed. Thankfully, I didn't realize that, but the threats of death and sexual violence to me, to my kids, began immediately. And I can remember we called a police officer to our house because there was someone driving by, and the officer said, well, that's what you get when you mess with the Second Amendment, ma'am.
What?
And it was really then that I realized that I was either going to have to back down or double down. And my personality is such that I double down.
Yeah, you look very mild-mannered. It's very deceptive.
Yeah, I'm not mild-mannered, no.
But you've never wavered. You've never thought, that's enough. Like, I'm...
Sure. I mean, there's lots of times I'm scared. But what is more frightening to me is that gun violence is the #1 cause of death among American children and teens.
I know. It's crazy.
And, you know, if survivors can wake up and do this work every day, save the lives of perfect strangers, and simultaneously deal with the grief that they're experiencing, surely I can do the same. I mean, Alice Walker said, activism is the rent I pay to live on the planet. And I really believe that we have to all find an issue that we're passionate about and find a piece of that work and do it.
Yeah. More power to you. There's a lot of us who look at you every day with admiration. I'm one of them.
Thank you.
Tia, congrats. So Tia's the other half of the co-directors. We met Emma, her co-director, this morning, talking about abortion rights. But we wanted to also honor you guys as Changemakers for bringing the issue of abortion rights to the fore. You were doing your film about the Janes before we knew Roe v. Wade was going down. And then you and I have spoken a couple of times as it was happening. Well, let's just start with, how has that experience been to have your film about the story of women who basically created an underground abortion system, underground railroad for women who needed abortion in Chicago in the late 60s, as this was happening in our country, that's the right was being taken away from us?
I mean, it was crazy. We thought we were making a film that looked at the past. We didn't realize it was a crystal ball into the future, into our present. And, you know, we began making the film in 2018 when Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed. But every step of the way, when we were in production, when we were editing, when we were in our sound mix, you know, there were milestones. And it was very, very clear that Roe was not long for this world. But even before Dobbs, you know, in 2021, I think it was the number of abortion restrictions and barriers that were put up legislatively by state legislatures, you know, broke all records. So even without Dobbs, you know, the situation was dire. But frankly, having this film released around the same month as Dobbs kept me out of jail. Because
what do you mean?
I was so angry.
Oh.
I was so angry, and I needed to harness this outrage. And I, frankly, was inspired by these women of Jane, these sisters, and the entire community that supported them in Chicago in the 70s and the 60s to make sure women didn't die from simple health care. So having this film on the road, on HBO, being able to impact people, being able to tell this tale, both the grim reality of what it looks like when abortion, access to safe abortion is denied people, but also what you can do about it, how women and everyone really can take action collectively and step into our own power and make sure this doesn't happen again.
Well, I mean, I think there are underground and gray zone groups that have mobilized to help women today get abortions who need them. We've had a lot of discussion at this event about what should Hollywood stance be, what should studios be, what do the guilds do to protect women on sets. And then there's the bigger question, which to me is the question of principle, because like you, the day that came down, I wrote a column that just said, when you're so angry, you're numb. It was like I almost didn't know, I couldn't feel anything because it took my breath away that my government was basically saying to me, no, you're not. The constitutional rights that are basically foundational, which means you have the right as an individual to your own life, liberty, and pursuit of that doesn't apply to you anymore. I still can hardly believe that they have the audacity to do that. So, I mean, I think that anger is still present. Now that you've taken the film out into the world and you've felt that anger sort of collectively from women and men, so many men of good conscience who this doesn't represent the society that they want to live in. They're part of every pregnancy, as far as I can tell. What is the path forward for whether the film has another step in it on its journey, or whether you, as a documentarian and not a straight-up activist, but somebody who's affected by this, how are you thinking about taking your passion forward on this, or your anger?
So this fall we did screenings targeting red states, targeting swing states, where abortion access for millions of women was going to be determined by what happened at the ballot box in November. And we brought the Janes, either virtually or in person, to many of these states to talk about their experience, to talk about the film. And we used those screenings to register voters. We sort of had a captive audience of young people particularly, and we hoped that this would not only get them to register, but also motivate them to make sure they showed up on Election Day. We can't claim credit for all the good that happened, but it was something. It was something that we could do. Now that election is over, we have some, more ballot initiatives coming up in this new year, and we have
ballot initiatives around like state level?
That's
or
right. That's
state
right.
level?
State level ballot initiatives, and we have state legislatures that are going to be determining, whether there will be bans in place. And so we hope that this film can help to engage people, to inform the conversation, and particularly on college campuses where, young people didn't live through this era. And it's a way for the generation of the Janes to engage in a dialogue and a conversation with young people. So I'm very excited about that. And it remains on HBO, so there's a whole nother level.
Well, we never know what's remaining on HBO every day, do we? That seems to change every day. HBO, please keep the Janes on your platform. Thank you.
Well, actually, and it was two extraordinary women who run the HBO original programming that commissioned this film.
Who was that? Let's say their names.
Lisa Heller and Nancy Abraham.
Yay.
And thanks to...
Go Lisa and Nancy.
And thanks to the movement that has happened to ensure that women filmmakers have funding to tell these stories. We're grateful to HBO, and we're grateful, to women before us who've insisted on that.
Yeah, one of the things Thank you. I don't want to cut off applause. One of the things that was amazing to me to watch, I don't report on elections. We report on media and entertainment at The Wrap. But of course, we were all watching this midterm election with so much trepidation, obviously, because of the red wave that everybody said was coming. And one of the things that kind of stunned me is that we're still, and convinced me that we're still stuck in a place where we're not paying attention to the voices that often are marginalized or not in the normal corridors of power, is this insistence that abortion was really not going to be a game-changing issue in this election. It was going to be the economy, it was going to be the recession, it was going to be all kinds of other things. And then when they actually did the exit polls and you saw the lines at universities, it was like the second issue, I think, it was abortion was like number 2 right after the economy. So it's a great lesson, I think. Don't you? I mean, I don't know what you took from that, but.
Well, and economic issues are absolutely connected to abortion rights.
Absolutely.
So that it's not surprising, but I like the fact that the legislators know what we have known all this time, that the vast majority of people in this country, support abortion rights and access to safe abortions, and they are going to pay the consequences if they don't pay attention.
Yeah, good. Yeah, maybe the Supreme Court. I wouldn't count on the Supreme Court for paying attention. So yeah, it's going to have to be some other governmental body. Skylar, as I said, you are the youngest person on this panel by a long shot. But those of us, we were so impressed by the work you're doing already. It's a little scary to think of where you might take that in 10 years. But talk about the work that you do for social justice, where it came from, how it started. I'll point out for the class that Skylar was honored by the United Nations this week or last week? This week in New York. What was the award that you got?
The Global Youth Humanitarian Award.
Global Youth Humanitarian Award. So she's not messing around. But what is that about, and how did it begin for you?
I think it all started just my personality. My parents have always loved to point out the fact that I am a chatterbox, that I love to talk. Mm-hmm. And I think partly to put that energy into something more productive, and maybe partly to keep them sane, they decided to put me into public speaking classes after school. And so as a third grader with a ton of energy, I got into slam poetry and I loved it. And at school, we had started a drive for Operation Smile. And so Operation Smile gives free surgeries to kids with facial deformities, specifically cleft lips and cleft palates.
Right.
And because a lot of the sutures are donated for the surgeries, it only costs $240 for one of these kids to receive a life-changing surgery. And so little me decided that I was going to raise $240, making bracelets and selling them to my classmates. And I think it was my shining moment when I had finally reached that goal. And so I had spoke at the Operation Smile Gala in Los Angeles, and
At what age?
I was 9.
Okay. Go on.
And I don't think I've ever felt more like myself being able to talk about the things that I really cared about, things that touched me than I did when I was on that stage. And a lot of it comes from my parents. They really instilled in me how fortunate I am that I've never had to worry about having, a roof over my head or food in the fridge. But it really shouldn't be just about me and whether I'm okay and whether I have those things. But it shouldn't be something that anyone has to worry about. And so I continued speaking on behalf of a few nonprofit organizations and realized I could be doing a lot more with a platform of my own. And that's when I was invited to speak at the Nexus Summit at the United Nations in 2018, where I officially launched Future Generations Now. And so Future Generations Now, we act as a funnel to raise both funds and awareness to create a young generation of like-minded students, kids, teenagers that want to engage in social activism surrounding education, equity, and the environment.
How's it going?
I think it's going pretty well. I think it's just been such an eye-opener and just amazing to watch my friends and my peers get involved and see how much they really care. It's never been that the young people don't care, and I think that that's a misconception that's very widely spread, that we don't care enough to actually, put in the effort to create change. And I think it's the opposite. I think that young people are going to be the real drivers of change, but only if we're given the opportunity to do so. And so that's really what Future Generations Now is about, is giving the opportunity to these young people that want to get involved, that want to make a difference, and showing them how, giving them role models and examples and ways to actually start in their own communities and turn it into something bigger.
So do you have any sense of like the size, the scale of the number of young people who've joined the group, or who, you know, how you're actually concretely on the ground?
So we have clubs that are actually in several schools in Los Angeles, but right now our biggest project is we've just partnered with Community Catalyst Partners to create a climate leadership pathway program that will go in all of its ISSN schools starting next year, and then in all high schools in California by the end of 2028.
Wow. So what will that be? Is raising awareness about climate change, or?
So it starts with environmental issues, people getting involved in terms of climate change, but also just smaller things in their own community. Because although climate change is an extremely big issue, there are other things that contribute to our environment that I think are not talked about as much as well.
Like
and
what?
So,
like what?
Well, when you have like pollution, or you have smaller things like in the beaches that you have in your hometowns, those are small ways for students to get involved and see a small difference in their own world. And those are the little things that are going to get them to keep going. And so when you put this big problem in front of them, like climate change, it also tends to be a little bit of a doomsday concept. Because from a young age, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around the fact that unless we're doing something now, our world is coming to an end. And I think that sometimes it's better to give them these small assignments, these small tasks, and when they see real change being made, it encourages them to keep going, so that they want to see bigger changes being made on that bigger scale.
I mean, I'm just curious what gave you the chutzpah to say, like, I can be a leader as a teenager. Yeah, I can be a leader on a global issue with grown-ups, really, you know, not just in my high school, but like on a much bigger scale.
I think part of it is the reaction that I've gotten from the very beginning. I think that people have been so supportive, so encouraging of everything that I've done, and it really is due to the community that stands behind me, that has pushed me in everything that I do. I always talk about my parents. My mom is the strongest, most beautiful woman I know. And
all right, Mimi. Yeah. she's probably here.
But she has really, really paved a way for me to see what a strong woman looks like. And I think that she's one of the biggest reasons that I'm sitting on the stage tonight.
Very cool. All right, we'll come back to Sarah.
Guys, I make a show about dragons.
Great. Sarah,
It's a fun show.
Yeah, she called me. She's like, I'm on this panel. There's like this lady who's like fighting gun violence on the panel with me. Are you sure I should be? I think that you're giving yourself a little bit short shrift, frankly. We put you on this list because it's amazing what you've achieved with this show, for one thing. You're the co-executive producer of one of the most, not just one of the most successful from a rating standpoint, but like one of the most complex and challenging and multi-character and difficult and exciting and entertaining shows. Like, we love your show. And if it's a show about dragons that everybody obsesses over, then
No, it's definitely just as important.
Well, let's talk about how did you get Sarah? Okay. Tell us a little bit how you got involved in the show. Ryan Condal is now the executive producer.
Yes.
The co-executive producer? Is that what it's called?
He's an executive producer as
Okay,
am I,
you're also the executive
Yeah,
producer.
yeah.
Okay. Did he bring you on the show, or who brought you on the show?
I was
I know it just
recruited-
fell on your lap out of nowhere, and you just got like a phone call saying, "Hey, come write this."
Kind of.
Okay, I don't believe that.
Well, I worked on the previous prequel to Game of Thrones pilot that HBO produced and then didn't end up picking up. And so when that went down, they asked me to come over to this one. I was good friends with Miguel Sapochnik, who was the co-showrunner and the director of the pilot, so he asked me if I would come on, and I initially said no.
What were you doing before that?
I did 4 years of Orange is the New Black, and then I had a baby, and I had taken some time off. So.
Okay, I'm sorry. And then you had a baby.
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Okay. I just in case you missed that.
So I was taking some time off and trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and so this opportunity came along. And frankly, I ended up doing the first pilot because Donald Trump had just been elected, and I wanted to get out of the United States. And HBO was like, "Do you want to go to London?" I was like, "Sure." So I ended up there working on this, and that's
such a good reason. But why would? Okay, sorry to interrupt you, but why would working on Orange is the New Black logically make you like first in line to work on a pilot on a dragon show?
I mean, I asked the same question. I think as different as they are both big shows with big casts that tell multi-layered stories with there's on Orange is the New Black, as on Game of Thrones, our cast list goes down to 80 on the call sheet. So there's a million stories that you're trying to interweave in the same time. So I think that was really good practice. But also I think actually coming out of that gave me an advantage going into this. I was hesitant to sign on to this show because Game of Thrones, as you may have heard, originally was not a bastion of feminine
yeah, we noticed
representation.
Even though the first season the lead was a woman.
Yes.
Amelia Clark, who we've had actually at Power Women
yes.
in that heyday.
Yes.
And so it has like an interesting relationship, I think.
It has an interesting, but definitely there are feelings people have about it that are perhaps not, it's not the most pro-women it could possibly be.
And it's super violent.
Well, yeah, and so is ours, but.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, but I think I met with Ryan and he was asking me, he was sort of recruiting me, and I was reluctant to do it at first, and I sort of expressed all my reservations to him, and his response was, "Listen, this is why I need you. I'm married to a girl from Jersey. If I don't get this right, she'll kill me." Which was, I was like, okay, that kind of was a good reason to.
Very convincing argument.
But it turned out, I looked into the material, and it really was an opportunity to tell a story from a female perspective that had perhaps not been told that way before. And it became really interesting to me to tell, the story, what was it like to be a woman in this fictional but based on a historical time, and how do you define yourself as a woman, and how do you define yourself in relation to the patriarchy and in relation to the systems that are sort of forcing you to be siloed in a certain way. So yeah, it became a really great opportunity.
Those are conversations you've had with Ryan as you're writing 100%. The show front and center?
100%. I think that was the thing I came in interested to do. So if that wasn't an opportunity, if there was an opportunity there, I don't think I would have taken the job.
Is there any way, because we've all seen it, I'm going to presume, that you can sort of point to in either a plot point or a character where that was actualized, something that came from you?
Well, I think one of the many things we've talked about previously was all the many birth scenes that we do on the show, which really sort of graphically represents what it's like to have a baby. And that was a thing when we went into the story. The first season is compressed time, and many children are born during the course of the story. And so it was kind of a back and forth about, are we going to show all these births? Is it going to be boring? We've seen, there are many children born. What are we going to do about it? And that definitely was a thing that I felt very strongly about, because I felt like every birth scene I've ever seen in any TV show or movie ever has looked exactly the same, which is the woman's lying on her back with her whatever time period, whatever, and she's on her back pushing, and then the baby comes out, and it's oh, congratulations, and it's sort of that scene. And I was saying to the guys, every birth I've ever heard about from my friends or experiences, they're all completely different. They are different experience, and depending on the woman who's doing it and the what the circumstances are, that is a part of a woman's story that I feel is just completely sort of blandified in popular entertainment. Like, I have a friend who gave birth standing up. I have friends who've given birth. So we sort of made it a point actually to go in and show 4 separate births and make them all different and bring to it like the various, the variety of experience. And to one of our themes on the show, which I think Ryan and Miguel have probably talked about before, is that the birth in that time period was the woman's battlefield. And so the men are out doing their, fighting with swords. And for a woman, it was, every time you're pregnant, this could be the day you die. And you're going into battle to sort of preserve the human race. And so we were very, very conscious of making it, of bringing that perspective to it and trying to show it in all of its various, the opposite of glory. But in all of its various permutations and possibilities.
Yeah, a couple of the characters die in childbirth.
A couple of the characters die. I made a point to put in a character who had her breasts leaking and to sort of just, sort of try to feel what it's like to be.
Was any of that what you went through?
I actually had an emergency C-section, so I guess I would be dead if not for modern medicine. Like at that point,
you did too?
Yeah, he wasn't coming out. So so yeah, at the time it was like, oh sure, they're gonna have a C-section, great, no problem. And it's only later I kind of thought about it. I was like, oh, I would have just died that night, and it would have been over.
In Middle Earth, yeah.
Yeah. So it was important, I think, to show how, actually, not to like, glom onto all the incredible work, but it's like, a lot of people have said, oh my God, this is making me feel differently about abortion rights, because when you see what it really is and how what you are forcing a woman to go through, that it's, in all its graphic grimness, if you don't want to do that, that's a kind of horrific thing to put somebody through. And so, it's been interesting in light of that.
That is how we move the culture forward, though. That's what we've talked about all day, is like the storytellers move the culture forward, and maybe more people might be thinking about how abortion as a real life thing impacts a woman from watching those scenes in House of Dragons than, no offense, than from watching the Janes. It's true. So that's a reminder that like the importance of why we do this event is like everything that the people in this industry does has a huge ability to move the world forward. Last question. They're telling me to wrap it. But just one last thing. I just wanted to point out. You said you came up out of a diversity program of some kind, or that somehow connected you to like helped you get your start.
Yes. I was working for David Milch on Deadwood at HBO, and then it's a long story. But I ended up on House at Fox through the diversity program there, and that was my first staff writer job, and then I ended up working my way up there, and I was there for 7 years, so yeah, that definitely jump-started my entry into this business.
Thank you. I just wanted to point it out because like diversity programs can work, and look, here you are at the top of your field on one of the most popular shows on television, and you're there because of your talent, but you got a break, maybe.
I don't think I would have been hired at House if not for the diversity program, where it's like, I was free, so where the studio is footing the bill to bring in an extra writer and teach them something. So I definitely, benefited massively from that.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
We're out of time, but thank you all. Congratulations again. You inspire us. We want to encourage you in your work and let you know that we're here watching you and cheering you guys on your journeys. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon.